Hey guys, today I want to talk about reptile enclosures. One thing I want to talk about is heat tape. I'm going to be heating these enclosures with heat tape. And the thing with heat tape is it's recommended that you change out your heat tape every year. That, by the manufacturer, they recommend that. Most of us don't, but it is very important to check your heat tape every few months to make sure that it's not degrading, that the plastic is still there and it's not wearing off, and that none of the wires are exposed. And I don't think a lot of people do that. A lot of the people I know that have reptiles don't do that. I do, and it's very important for me to check my heat tape and make sure there are no spots that are burning through, because I don't want my reptiles getting burned. So it's something that I do. And with a rack system, a tub rack system, that's very easy to do. You can slide out the tubs, you can look at the heat tape, and it's right there. You can see it and see if there's any damaged spots. However, with an enclosure, it's a little bit different. So I'm going to show you a method that I did with my heat tape and why I did it. So let me grab this. What most people will do when they get an enclosure is they'll go ahead and they'll either do a radiant heat panel up on the roof. But when I looked at those, they're $60 to $80 for the size I need per tub. So that's nearly $400 extra for the heat. So I went ahead with heat tape because it was more inexpensive and still just, it works just as well. And I like belly heat rather than overhead heat anyway. And so what most people would do is they will slap the heat tape right here on the bottom and either tape it down, which I don't like, because then your reptile is right on the heat tape, and because my reptiles push all the substrate out so they can rest right on the plastic. So if they do that and they're resting right on the heat tape, and if it ever burns through, it can burn your reptile. So I don't like to have the heat tape in the enclosure with the animal. Another thing they do is they'll put the heat tape down and then they'll put tile over it. So let's say this was a tile and they put the tile over it. The thing is, you have to seal everything in here so water doesn't get under, and so you would have to caulk around here. See, I caulked all this, but to make the heat tape to where water can't get to it, you'd have to caulk the tile. But then you go back to what I was talking about, periodically checking it to see if the heat tape is degrading or not. So you would have to slice the silicone, lift the tile to look at it, and then reseal it again. And I don't like that. I want to be able to periodically check my heat tape without having to go through that. So one way to get around having your heat tape inside the enclosure is to put it under the tank. And the only thing about that is I'm using 1/2 inch PVC, and it's pretty thick. So to have the heat tape here and go through 1/2 inch of PVC isn't going to really work. So I had to come up with some way. So this is what I came up with, and I love it. I love the idea, and it's going to work very nicely. And I'll show you what I did. So what I did was I created a groove right here in the bottom of the enclosure. And what that allows me to do is take the heat tape, and I'm going to do this one-handed, so it'll be a little tricky, but you can take the heat tape and actually slide it in to the groove and slide it out as needed. So, and I'm sorry about the lighting. I'm in my garage and there's not much lighting here, but basically this will be in here, and whenever I want to check the heat tape and check the integrity of the heat tape, I slide this out. I can look at it. It's good. Put it back in, and it's all good to go. So I did that on all of these enclosures, and it allows me to check the heat tape, and it also keeps the heat tape out of the enclosure. There's nothing in here, so if like my rainbow boa has a big tub in her enclosure, and sometimes when she gets in there she gets water out onto the the bottom. That won't ever seep onto the heat tape, because think about it, if your heat tape has a little spot where it's burned through and it's exposed and water gets on it, that's going to be electrified. And I just don't want that with my reptiles, and I also just don't want my reptiles getting burned. So I don't like to have the heat tape inside the enclosure with the reptiles, where they can spill water onto it, where they can pull it up, or where they'll be laying directly on the heat tape. So this method keeps the heat tape out of the enclosure and keeps it underneath. And the way I did that was I took a router. This is 1 foot heat tape, so I routed a little bit bigger than a foot, so the heat tape only comes up to about there, and then I have some space on the sides to actually screw into without screwing through the heat tape. So I routed half of this away. This is the 1/2 inch, so I took a 1/4 off, and then I took a 1/4 inch panel and routed that halfway through, and that gives me that gap, that little slice there, to slide the heat tape in and slide it out. And I wanted to make it thick enough for the heat tape, but also the ends of the heat tape where you put the rivets and then the tape, the electrical tape. So that makes it a little thicker, so that way that'll slide through just fine. And I left these edges normal size. These are 1/4 inch, and that way when I put it in there, it'll leave that gap. See, that still allows for the gap, because if you route it all the way, if you were to route it all the way, it would just lay flat like that, and you would have no space. So you got to leave these edges, and that gives me some meat in this panel to put screws through. So the enclosures are finished now, and everything's set up, and I'll show you how the heat tape is in, how I installed it. I went ahead and pulled the enclosures away from the wall so I can get behind and show you. So I made 4 enclosures, and you can see how the heat tape goes into the bottom panel of each enclosure. So this is 1/2 inch PVC right here, and that's where I grooved a 1/4 inch away from this 1/2 inch sheet right here, and then this is a 1/4 inch panel, and I routed half of that away, and as I showed before, that allows the heat tape to slide on out, be inspected, and then slid back in. Initially I was going to put this end inside as well, but I decided to leave a little bit of the heat tape out, because when I thought of this idea, one thing that I didn't think of was the probe. So I placed the probe here, which connects to my herp sat down here, but the probe wouldn't fit into this slot here. I mean, it would, but it left a little bit of an arch on the bottom, and so it didn't want to sit properly, so I decided to leave a couple inches of the heat tape out, and that way I can just tape the probe here. But I did it on all of them. In case I ever wanted to move the probe, I can put it up here, I can put it up there, you know, just give me a choice if I want to move the probe to a different level. But yeah, that's it. That's how it works. But you can take it out real easily, inspect them, and I'll show you the inside of the cage. So here we are inside the enclosure, and like I said before, I don't like to have heat tape on inside the enclosure because a number of reasons. I don't want the snakes pulling up the heat tape. I don't want them resting on top of the heat tape. I don't want water spilling onto it, urates getting onto it. So I prefer to have the heat tape coming up from underneath. And so this whole area, it's a 2x1 sheet of heat tape, so it goes back 2 feet, and then it's 1 foot across. And this is her hot spot. And as you can see, she's hanging out over there in her cold spot. She just got done doing an enormous shed, so I'm going to take that out. But I'll go ahead and get a temp for you guys. You can see I keep the hot spot at 91. And what I find is that, they'll come and they'll move the substrate so they can be right on the plastic. But anyway, that's my method for doing the heat tape, and easy way to, if you're doing an enclosure, if you want to have heat tape on an enclosure but not inside it, that's a method I came up with for having it coming up through the bottom. And so far it's been working well. I've had this set up for about 4 months now, and it's worked very well, and allows me to pull my heat tape out and check it periodically. But it's pretty nice. So that's my method for heating my enclosures. You know, if you're looking for a way to use heat tape on a larger boa enclosure, but you don't want to put the heat tape inside, this is the method I came up with. It seems to be working well. I've used it for about 4 months now, and I really like it. It's made it very easy for me to just slide the heat tape, check the integrity of the heat tape at a glance, and then just slide it back in. And you know, quick and easy. And if something's quick and easy, you're more likely to do it. So if you have any questions, let me know, and thank you for watching. Bye.